Hi, and welcome to Botany 101. My name is Angela Nishimoto, and I'll be your instructor for this course. Can we go to the Elmo, please? Okay. So this is Botany 101, General Botany, and this is a televised course. Yes. My name is Angela, and I have a Master of Science degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, emphasis in botany. And in addition to this televised course, the lecture, we'll be having some WebCT exercises. And the WebCT URL is http://webct.hawaii.edu. Okay? And when you do get onto the WebCT page, it should look like this. Okay? You'll see something like this when you open it up, okay? And you should be able to log in using your login for MyUH portal, the same one that you used, okay, when you registered for this course, all right? All right, thank you, okay? Now, furthermore, if we could go back to the Elmo, okay? You are going to be actually having different kinds of assignments for this class, right? For one thing, we're going to have 3 exams, and I'll go into it a little bit later when to expect them. And each of these exams will be 100 points, all right? Secondly, on the WebCT, which we just talked about, there will be 9 WebCT quizzes, okay? And each of them is worth 10 points. So let's see, these quizzes too, are open book, open notes, okay? I have no problem with people helping each other with these quizzes. The one thing I ask is that please do your own quiz, okay? That's about it. But this is a good opportunity to earn 90 points, okay? Pretty much free, all right? And they should be a good way to learn your subject matter as well, all right? Now we also have, okay, going back to the Elmo, we have 2 learning logs at 10 points each. And these learning logs are a way for you folks to show that you understand the assignments that they deal with. The first learning log will be a written assignment about 1.5 pages long, a formal paper, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the subject of it will be, you will be writing about the plant cell. Now, the reason for this learning log is, for one thing, to kind of show me that you can write, yeah, for one thing. And secondly, most importantly, that you do understand the plant cell, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to understand. So this will hopefully help you to learn the parts of the plant cell. Your second learning log will have to do with, could we go back to the Elmo? The second learning log will have to do with a genetics problem that we'll have assigned later in the semester. And we'll talk more about these learning logs as the semester progresses. Now, your last assignment will be a poster project presentation, because over the course of this class, we will be covering all the chapters in our textbook. And so in the lecture, we're only covering chapters 1 through 9, and the chapters after that, we'll be doing the poster projects, okay? So the total possible points for your assignments will be 450 points, all right? And the way that you're graded, okay, has to do with, generally, you're going to be graded on the total number of points that you earn. So for example, if you earn 90% or above the total possible points, you will have earned an A. And if you earn from 80% to 89%, you will have earned a B, and etc. 70 to 79%, a C, and unfortunately under that, 60 to 69%, a D, and under 60%, you will not pass the course, unfortunately. But since we're doing points only, you know, you're not going to be competing with other people. I kind of don't believe in that. But you will be competing with yourself and sort of be gauged against your objective criteria, okay? Now another thing too is that just about anybody can earn an A in the class if they apply themselves, do their work, you know, and everything like that. So because we have the 90% and above being an A, anybody can earn an A, okay? And I'm hoping that someday that's something that will happen. Now, if we can go back to the Elmo, we'll show the course schedule a little bit, okay? And so what we'll show is that generally in about the 5th week, we'll have your first exam. And your first exam will comprise chapters 1 through chapter 3, okay? Your second exam will be about in the 11th week of the class, of the course, and it'll cover chapters 4 through chapter 6. And the last exam, which is the 3rd exam here, okay, will be during finals week, all right? And exam 3 will not be cumulative, but it will cover from chapter 7 to chapter 9. And of course, as in any science course, generally all the knowledge that you get later on is built on previous knowledge that you take in earlier in the course, okay? All right. So since we've kind of gone through most of the mechanics of this class, I want to show you one more piece of paper on the Elmo, okay? And this has to do with the texts that are assigned for this class, okay? So one of the texts is the lecture notes by Priscilla Millen. She's a botany professor here at Leeward Community College. And the second required course is Plants in Society by Levitin and McMahon, right? Now, in addition to these 2 required texts, recommended is Introductory Plant Biology by Kingsley Stern, okay? So that is your option to get that or not, but it will be a great help if you do, okay? But one of the required texts, okay, is this one here, Plants in Society, okay, 4th edition. And this should be on sale at the LCC bookstore, all right? All right, okay. Okay, so we're gonna launch right away into the first lecture. Usually I try not to do, too much at the beginning to kind of ease people into the class itself, but with all these 9 chapters that we're gonna be covering, generally we want to make sure that we cover everything that we need to in sufficient depth. Right? So we're going to start with lecture today. So hope it isn't too much of a shock, but hopefully we'll have fun, okay? Okay, so here we are in Botany 101, General Botany, and this is the first session. We're going to do the first part having to do with plants in our lives, which is based on chapter 1 in the Levitin and McMahon text, all right? Okay, so first of all, we'll go through the objectives for this session 1. First of all, we're going to talk about plants and humans and the relationships between the two, especially human beings' reliance on plants. They're of extreme importance to life as we know it on Earth. Secondly, we're going to go over the flowering plants, just a very brief introduction to them. Flowering plants are also known as angiosperms. Scientists generally have different kinds of terminologies that they use. Okay, so angiosperms, okay, refer to plants, flowering plants, all right? Angio means vessel or container, and sperms means seed. So flowering plants carry their seeds in a container that we know of as fruits. So when you think about fruits, cherries, peaches, apples, oranges, okay, these are all the result of flowering plants, their sexual reproduction, okay? Now, thirdly, we're going to talk about non-flowering plants, and these include the gymnosperms, all right, as well as some of what some people call the lower plants, such as the mosses and the ferns. We're also going to talk a little bit about a corollary group that are related to plants, sorta, and these are called the algae. The algae are a plural form, so you can talk about, all the different algae, all right? Now, when you talk about a particular species or a particular individual of algal individual, we'll call it an alga. That's singular. Fungi are the same. Fungi is plural, fungus is singular, okay? And they're, the algae and the fungi are fascinating sort of organisms. Did you know also that algae and fungi are not that closely related to plants? Well, some algae are, but not necessarily fungi. Fungi are actually more closely related to us. Can you imagine that? Okay? Even though algae and fungi are sort of organisms that that are traditionally studied by botanists, because when you think about them, well, algae, they sort of, undulate in the water. Fungi sit, wherever they are, they don't seem to move, and plants are the same way. One of the terminology for this is called sessile. That's an organism that sits in one place and doesn't really move. And when you think about it, generally animals like us, we generally can move. Although there are other animals such as sponges that don't necessarily do it either, yes? Anyway, so this is maybe a reason why algae and fungi and oftentimes bacteria are traditionally studied by botanists. It's because these generally are organisms that are sessile. Okay, they usually sit in one place or they drift passively if they happen to be aquatic or living in water, all right? Now in terms of plants and humans, okay? So our first topic. Generally, we humans, we have 4 needs, okay? I know when I was, like in primary school, we used to think that humans had 3 needs, but we find out currently, in our modern world, we have 4 needs. Of course, the first one, very, very important, is that we have a need for food. We are ingestive heterotrophs. That means that we need to get our energy source as well as our carbon source from other organisms. So what do? We need to take it in, and eat them, consume them, or ingest them. Okay, so we need food. So food will include things like, salads, and of course that's very, very much tied to plants. But do you know also that when you eat that steak, when you go to a restaurant or when you cook it at home on the grill, when you eat that steak, that cow that is a source of that steak will have been feeding on grasses and other kinds of vegetative matter. Okay, so generally all the food we eat, okay, whether it's vegetative or whether it's animal products, okay, they all come from plants. All right. The second need that we have, of course, that we have a need for clothing. Okay. A lot of places in the world, people need to cover their bodies, not just for, ornamental purposes or to look nice, because of course, in our modern world, a lot of us want to look nice, but also people also need to cover their bodies for modesty, as well as to protect their bodies against the elements. Even here in Hawaii, in the olden days, before 1778, which was the time of contact, the European contact with the Hawaiian Islands, that the people here did wear clothing, mostly for modesty, even though in Hawaii we have a very, very equable climate. It's very pleasant to live here, yes? But still, people, the men wore malo, the women wore pa'u or skirt, and both sexes wore sometimes a shawl or a kihei, yes? So even here in Hawaii, in paradise, people did have clothing as well. Okay. Now the third need, okay, so these are the 3 needs that I learned when I was a little kid, okay, food, clothing, and shelter. And of course, plants contribute to shelter, okay, through wood products, okay, as well as, paper doors and paper walls, such as in Japan. So people use rice paper for that, yes. Thirdly, a current topic, sort of like a current modern sort of material for shelter is bamboo. I went to the Building Industry Association new product and housing show, new housing and product show. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was called, but that actually was a place where I first saw this bamboo flooring. And if you look, if you happen to be living in an apartment or a condominium or a residence, and you want to, refloor your home or to add certain things in, one of the hot materials that people are using now is bamboo. So if you do happen to have a 1-acre plot, or you have some land that you happen to be in your family and you're trying to think of a way to make the land produce, you can grow bamboo. It's extremely quick growing. It doesn't require a whole lot of fertilizer. Again, that's something that you can grow on your property and harvest and sell, because that is, as building materials get to be more expensive, we're turning to alternative. And bamboo is actually a very ancient building material, as well as one that's, in vogue right now. Another thing about bamboo is, I believe I heard that on Molokai, they had built a model home, all the way that meets building specs in Honolulu and other areas on the islands. And it's a model home that people can sort of look at and see, what it looks like. So I'm thinking that this might be a building material of the future, okay? Now another thing too that we need now for our everyday work. Like for us here in Honolulu, or in Pearl City, or in Kaneohe, yes, we generally need to have a car. Generally, if we don't have a car, well, we have to catch a bus. And if we don't have a car and we don't catch a bus, well, it's kind of hard actually to go to work if you live very far, from where you do work. All right. So fuel is a fourth main necessity that we humans have nowadays. Now, fuel, amazingly, okay, all fuel except for nuclear power and maybe geothermal energy and hydroelectric power, generally all fuel comes from plants, even the gasoline that you put into your car. Now, fuel for us, some of us might think, sort of puritanically, that automobiles now are not really a necessity. And in fact, maybe that might be something that might become outmoded, who knows, with the different developments, that have been happening worldwide. But we've gotten used to it, yes? And anyway, so generally, all gasoline, kerosene, that these for us are important in terms of, starting our hibachi or driving our cars. But in other places, cold places, places that are in the desert, they also use fuel, crude oil that is refined. They use it for heating their homes or also for cooling their homes as well. And of course, we're here right now, we're in an air-conditioned studio, yes? So generally, we do use fuel for these reasons. So it's kind of exciting. We live in exciting times because we do have the opportunity to investigate other sources of fuel, such as trees, kukui nut oil, and other such like that we can maybe even grow our own, sources of fuel for us here in Hawaii. This is very exciting. Whenever anything that you might think of as bad happens, it's an opportunity to actually improve and progress. Yes? Okay. Now, generally, plants and algae. Okay, plants and algae, and also blue-green bacteria. They're also known as blue-green algae, but sometimes people get confused if you say that. So you have organisms called plants, you have organisms called algae, and you have another kind of organism called blue-green bacteria. And what do? They do an extremely important biochemical reaction known as photosynthesis, all right? Photosynthesis, you can tell what's happening when you look at the word. And many times when you actually look at a word and you figure out what the roots come from, generally you can figure out sometimes through context what the word means. So photo refers to light, okay? Synthesis means to bring together something. So photosynthesis is a means by which plants take sunlight energy from the sun. The sunlight, the sun actually beams out, a lot of energy from it. The sun is actually a thermonuclear reactor. That's generally what that is. So even though it's quite far away from the Earth, still the plants here and the algae and the blue-green bacteria will harvest the sunlight energy and change it into chemical energy using carbon dioxide and water. Think about that. Plants are just using air and they're using water. And what they do from that is they make sugar, okay, chemical energy. And because of that, plants, algae, and blue-green bacteria are known as producers in ecology. The field of ecology, plant ecology or animal ecology or just ecology, has to do with interactions between different organisms and their environment. And in ecology, plants and algae and blue-green algae are called producers. Okay. What they do is they take the sunlight energy, convert it to chemical energy, and then what they do with that energy is that they build more plant. They make they grow, they get bigger, and then what they do after that is that they'll grow and then animals eat them, and when they do die, they decompose, and the decomposers will consume them also. So plants are the basis of almost all the food chains on this earth, almost all of them. Did you know also that in Hawaii, we have lava tube ecosystem? Yeah, very unusual. In fact, we might have one of the very few lava tube ecosystems in the country, in the United States. So in these lava tubes, you might think, there's a whole bunch of fauna that lives in these lava tubes, cave crickets and cave spiders and different kinds of other kinds of arthropods that don't have any pigmentation, and some of them are blind, they're eyeless, because they have evolved and lived in absolute darkness. But did you know, even though there are no plants necessarily in the dark, because they need light to do their photosynthesis, the ohia trees, okay, what they'll do, ohia lehua, which is one of the major forest trees of Hawaii, they'll actually send the roots way down into the soil, into these lava tubes. And then the roots will actually penetrate into these lava tubes, and then you'll have these little plant hoppers that will, you know, put their little mouth parts into the ohia roots, suck up the sugar, and then what it'll do is it'll feed this insect even though the plant is way above it, yes? So even in something like a lava tube ecosystem, plants are still the basis of the food chain, okay? Very important, okay? Now another important thing in terms of photosynthesis is a byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen gas. Okay, two of the main products of photosynthesis are the sugar that we talked about, and secondly, oxygen gas. Oxygen gas, which is also known shorthand as O2, is molecular oxygen, and it comprises about 20%, okay, of our atmosphere. All organisms that live now, just about all of them, we all need oxygen gas to do a process known as cellular respiration. Without cellular respiration, we couldn't live. Cellular respiration happens in all cells, in just about all organisms, all the time, okay? Cellular respiration is taking sugar and breaking it down into a form of energy that the cell can recognize, okay? So we're going to go through that later. Now here, excuse me, we see a green leaf. Okay, one of the things we see about this leaf is that generally what we'll see is we see these veins. Okay, these veins are actually showing what they call vascular tissue in the leaf. Okay, what happens is that the plant takes up water from the soil, okay, moves it through the roots, okay, up into the stems, into the leaves, because remember, during photosynthesis, the plant needs air in the form of carbon dioxide. The plant also needs water. So the plant will take up water from the soil, move it to the plant, okay, through the vascular tissue, through the stem, into the leaves, and you can see they'll go into smaller and smaller veins until they're pretty much permeating all the cells in the leaf. And in this way, okay, the water will be used in biochemical reaction to form sugars along with carbon dioxide, all right? So another thing, what do you see about this leaf? What is the one thing you notice about it really quickly? Okay, so think about it for a minute. Well, the leaf is green, yes? Well, that's one of the things about us humans. We're very visual animals. You know, we can really see quite a lot. And one of the first things anybody sees is color. Okay, so leaves generally are green, and that's actually a characteristic of many plants as well. Leaves are green, and why are they green? They're green because they have the pigment chlorophyll. Okay, two different kinds of chlorophylls generally in the leaves of terrestrial or land plants. Okay, you have chlorophylls A and chlorophylls B, chlorophylls A and B. Excuse me. And then what that does is that chlorophyll A and B, what they'll do is that they'll harvest a little bit different wavelengths of light, okay? Chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, one is more yellow-green, one is more bluish-green, but generally they are pigments that are in the leaves and sometimes in the stems of plants, okay? So the leaf is the organ of the plant that does most of the photosynthesis. All right, and let's see, there's one more thing I wanted to say about that. Oh yes, so you have chlorophyll pigments, and also in the leaf you also have other pigments called carotenoids. Okay, we'll go into that a little bit later as we progress, you know, through this lecture and into the next, and etc. into this semester. Okay, all right, so generally too, okay, plants and humans. Okay, so one main thing that they produce, of course, is molecular oxygen. And molecular oxygen is also known as O2. You can see the O stands for the atom, and that sub number 2, that just tells you that there are two oxygens bonded together. And here are three different ways that oxygen gas is depicted, okay, in this illustration. First of all, you have these two O's, you know, standing for atoms of oxygen. Okay, and they're joined in something called a double covalent bond. Okay, and we're going to get into that in the next lecture, probably in the next session. Yes, because we're going to be doing chemistry a little bit. Here's another way. You know, you have this kind of ball and stick model showing the two oxygen atoms as these red orbs in this particular drawing with a double bond between these two. All right. And then here you have a space filling model here that shows, it doesn't show the bonds, but it does show that there are two atoms making up this oxygen molecule. All right? this is a good introduction, because a good illustration, because we will be getting into chemistry next time, and chemistry sometimes is very hard to visualize. So we'll be making a lot of use of diagrams, okay, because we have to be able to visualize what we see. Yes? Another thing too, so oxygen, one of the main sorts of things that plants actually produce for us. Okay, and another thing, of course, building materials. We talked about this a little bit before. The building materials such as wood, you see this beautiful piece of wood, the heartwood in the center, the softer wood outside. Okay, what is wood actually? It's actually vascular tissues in the plants. Okay, so this tissue here, which is known as xylem, okay, conducts water in the plant. So this is the heartwood. So this part here is not really living tissue anymore, and the sapwood, okay, here is also non-living, but what it does in a living plant, it will actually move water through the plant from the root into the stem and into the leaf. Okay, so wood, a very important building material due to the fact that wood will deform. You can actually bend it a little bit and it springs back into its original shape. It's also beautiful, so we humans nowadays, we very much appreciate the beauty of wood. Yes? If you watch HGTV or some other of those channels that shows, you know, house construction and everything like that, one of the things you'll see in really fancy homes, you'll see, you know, big open beams in the ceiling and all that. So generally wood, very valuable. Another thing also is that we talked about bamboo. We talked about, we talked about rice paper in terms of a building material. Now another building material also that is used that comes from plant nowadays. If you notice, say if you go to Ho'omaluhia Botanical Garden, or if you go maybe to Foster Garden, I think they might have this too, they're making park benches, and they're making picnic tables and things from plastics. I believe that I saw a bench at Ho'omaluhia, and a little plaque on it said that this bench was made out of, you know, several hundred plastic jugs, you know, water jugs that were recycled to be used to make this bench. And I believe I read somewhere also that these plastics are being used and considered for building materials as well. All right. And did you know that many plastics and many synthetics have their origin, okay, in terms of wood, you know, pulp wood that people have used, so they might actually have their origin in wood as well, okay, plastics. Now, of course, fuel, okay, a very sore topic nowadays and very vital to our continuing economy. And I know some people get worried. You know, my idea is that maybe we might be able to still drive our automobiles, but maybe we might have sort of like a revolution in terms of materials. We might think about maybe legislating or making it mandatory for people to drive automobiles that have bodies made of fiberglass, something very light that will take up less gas. Yes, and also we'd have to legislate it, because if a metal car hits one made of fiberglass, it wouldn't be very safe. So maybe you'd have more lightweight car. And I think I've also read people are considering that in future people would keep their motors in their car and just change the body. And if you have fiberglass or something lightweight like that, or plastic, okay, it's generally lighter, you know, and if everybody drove a plastic car, I guess we wouldn't have such terrible accidents that sometimes happen. Anyway, so fuel, you know, a hot topic. And another thing is, of course, the fossil fuels that we pump offshore and are coming from Alaska and other places like that, they come from plants. Okay, you kind of think of, you know, you think of a commercial that was on television years ago. You have this pool, okay, of tar or material like that. You have these dinosaurs morphing, okay, out of this tar. Well, the thing is that generally the fossil fuels are mostly made of plant material, especially single-celled algae. All right, so that is actually the source of this fossil fuel that we use today. Okay, that is refined, fractionated, and made into gasoline, all right? What some people call petrol, you know? All right, so fuel, very important. And it is important, especially to places that get very cold, because I think that in Europe, I think a couple of years ago, they experienced the coldest winter in a while, and some people actually, you know, expired from that because they were exposed to cold. But in some places, it is very important for people to keep warm, yeah? And so let's see, so coal is also fossilized, partly compressed carbon material. And carbon, of course, comes from living organisms, and most of this came from the so-called Carboniferous forests, okay, from millions of years ago. So coal and also peat, you know, the bogs in, let's see, in Ireland and in Scotland, you know, the heaths and all these places, I think also in Australia. These are places where you've had many hundreds of thousands of years of mosses growing in these boggy conditions, and they get packed down and then they die and get packed down, more growing above it. Then what eventually these will become peat. And in some places, like in Irish bogs and such, people used to actually cut peat out of these bogs, take it home and burn it. Okay. They also have another thing called coke, which is another result of that sort of thing. So almost all the fuel that we use in our modern day comes from plants. Okay. And not just that, is in many places in the world, okay, people still have to, you know, go out and collect wood and bring them back to the home base and use it to cook with, as well as boil water with, and etc. Okay, so let's see. So fuel is a very important product that we get from plants. Right, then we also have paper. Okay, in our modern day, very, very important. And you know, the most ancient papers of all, okay, were actually made from papyrus in Egypt. I believe also in the Far East, people made paper from hemp, I believe, hemp, and also papyrus. Well, I think papyrus is more actually Egyptian. But still, paper, you know, what would we do without reading material? Yes, what would we do if we didn't know how to read? So the proliferation of reading material is something that we take for granted in our modern day, and it uses up an enormous amount of plant material, okay, in terms of pulp, especially gymnosperms, okay, or seed plants that don't have flowers, right? Okay, now another need that plants meet is, of course, we people, we need to actually, you know, tie things up and etc. So cordage is another important sort of product from plants, all right? Cordage includes things like linen, flax, you know, that people use. So linen, the fabric, as well as the cordages, come from plants as well, okay? Another thing is that here in Hawaii, we also had olona cordage, which is very important. In the olden days, they said that a man who could grow olona very well lived a life of ease. Okay, olona, very important. This comes from a plant that is a native endemic plant. That means that this plant exists only in Hawaii, naturally, nowhere else in the world. So in Hawaii, we have this plant that is in the nettle family, the Urticaceae, all right? And so this is olona. Very, very valuable cordage. It is actually responsible for the second strongest cordage from plant fibers in the world. Cordage also comes in the form of jute, okay, you know, burlap type of flowers. Hemp fibers were and are used for cordage as well, all right? Very important. And even the hau, or Hibiscus tiliaceus, is another source that people can use nowadays for cordage. Do you know you can probably just go down near water places, and there are hau trees, you know, there. You can actually harvest them, you know, maybe a 10-foot long branch of that, just slit it down there, shuck off the bark, scrape out the other bark, and you can actually make things like skirts to dance in, hula skirts. I believe Tahitian skirts originally was made from the bark, the inner bark of hau. So plants are responsible for the source of cordages as well. Now we also have fabrics, okay? Where would we be without our summertime, you know, summer weight cottons, all right? So someplace like Hawaii, where it gets to be very warm and generally the climate is very favorable, okay, for living, generally here we have a lot of fabrics that are made of cotton. So this is 100% cotton also. It's very comfortable, yes? So cotton is probably one of the most widely grown plants of all the fiber plants, fabric plants. Fiber plants. It's actually fiber because you need to have fiber to actually spin thread with and make a fabric from. Another important fabric, which is sort of like a luxury fabric nowadays, is called linen, yes? And linen, of course, is made from the flax plant. Thirdly, we also have something called rami. That tends to be maybe higher end sometimes. It's spelled R-A-M-I-E. Rami is also from a plant as well. So these fabrics are very important, okay, in terms of use. Okay, they're affordable, most of them, and we humans, we like nice things, so nice cotton, that's really nice. Where would we be without our nice cotton sateen sheets, you know? All right. Okay, now plants also are a good source of beverages. Now you see this very healthy, very delicious looking glass of orange juice there. Doesn't that make you want to just sit under a tree and have that? Anyway, so we have beverages such as orange juice, apple juice, tomato juice, okay, as well. And also other beverages such as those that have a little bit of stimulants in them, such as tea. Tea, you know, TEA, is actually a beverage that is the most widely drunk beverage of all in the world, okay, the favorite beverage of a lot of the people. When you think about it, that makes sense because tea is traditionally a drink in China and also in India. Yes, so those are two of the most populous countries in the world. I think also in Russia and other countries in the former Soviet Union, people like their cha, yes, their tea. So tea is definitely the most widely consumed beverage of all. Another beverage that for a lot of us, you know, kind of gets us up in the morning is coffee. Okay, very important. You know, nowadays people make a very much, it's like a cult, you know, of coffee. Now, where would we be without Starbucks? Yes. And another one, of course, is chocolate. Chocolate is another beverage. And in other places of the world, you have mate as well and other such. So plants, very important source of things to drink. Okay. We also have medicines. Medicines, about 20% of the medicines that we use today with our modern pharmaceuticals come directly from plants. And these include things like cinchona. Cinchona tree is actually the source of quinine, which is used in treatment of malaria, which is a disease that is very prevalent in tropical areas. Yeah, very dangerous. You know, people can die from it. We also have things like Taxol, which is a drug that is derived from the Pacific yew. And did you know in just maybe 10, 20 years ago, a lot of places where this plant was growing, people were clear cutting to make room for houses and for farms and such like that. And people didn't know that it had the anti-carcinogenic properties that it does, all right? So these plants, very important. So the Pacific yew, an important source of Taxol, which even now is used as a drug to treat cancer. I believe it's used to treat leukemias and such. Another drug plant that is used very much, you know, very expensive but very needed is medicine from the Madagascar periwinkle. I might be getting confused. It could be the periwinkle that is a source of for anti-carcinogenic properties for leukemias, whereas Taxol, I think, is used for ovarian cancer and other hard-to-treat cancers such as that. Another thing, too, is that did you know that medicines that are in our, pretty much in our bathroom cabinets, okay, such as aspirin. Aspirin is salicylic acid, yes? And salicylic acid originally, in its original form, was used by Native Americans and other peoples from the bark of willow. Willow is salix, S-A-L-I-X. And salix, what we humans did, is we got this pain-killing property and anti-inflammatory property that's in the substance from the salix plant, and we made a chemical analog for it, and that's what we know of as aspirin, okay? So aspirin is used by a lot of people, and people even use it off-label for things like thinning their blood a little bit, you know, for in case they have tendency toward heart disease in their family. So medicines, even now, very important, okay? Plants, very important in terms of sources of medicines, all right? All right, and another thing too is spices and herbs. In terms of dining out, here in Hawaii, we're getting famous for our, you know, Pacific Rim cuisine. Yeah, those star chefs that we have in Hawaii, very famous worldwide, yes. Some of them have cooking shows as well. And where would they be without all the spices and herbs? Did you know also that spices were the reason behind the voyages of discovery that went out in, say, the 1400s, the 1500s, the 1600s? The reason behind all these voyages out from Europe, you know, was because people wanted to find a roundabout way or a way to get around the middleman who kind of helped to sell the spices. What people usually did is that they got the spices from Southeast Asia, what they call what we call sometimes the East Indies, and these spices will be taken, you know, taken from there and traveling across the Arabian Peninsula in something called the caravanserai. You ever heard of that? The caravans of the Arab traders taking these spices, okay, from the Far East, taking them overland and then maybe selling them, I guess in Damascus and some of the other places in the Middle East that are, you know, main capitals. And then these spices and such would eventually make their way into Italy. This is one of the reasons why Italy was the beginnings of the Renaissance, you know, due to the spice trade. Whenever you have a lot of money, and so there was a lot of money flowing then. So what happened was Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, you know, they were the ones who commissioned Christopher Columbus to try to circumnavigate the globe. What they wanted to do is they wanted to find a way to get around the Arab middlemen so they could actually make a better profit in selling spices. Yes? All right. So that was a source of, that was a reason behind those voyages of discovery. Anyway, so the main thing that I want to stress here, this is the one thing you're going to take away from this class, if nothing else. I know sometimes when we actually get into the details of the class, we get into the tissues and the different parts, you know, of the class, including what's going to be coming up. Okay, sometimes we forget about, you know, we can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. So generally, what we humans do is we need to have plants for all of the reasons that we talked about. Yes, we need to have plants. We wouldn't be able to live at all without plants, okay, and plant-like organisms, right? Now, among the plants, for us humans nowadays, the angiosperms are the most important. Remember, we talked about angiosperms, meaning seeds in a vessel, okay? And the angiosperms in our modern days are the most important of all the plants. And these are also known as the flowering plants, okay? And the angiosperms comprise more than 250,000 species, right? There are quite a lot of them, okay? That isn't that much when you think about animal diversity, but still, that's quite a lot of plants, right? Now, species, what do we mean by the word species? The species are species are referred to in a two-part name. And this system of naming is called binomial nomenclature. All right? It's a sort of like a scientific sort of way of saying it. So scientific terminology, sometimes it can seem to be cumbersome, but scientific terminology we want to have as much as possible, we want to have it very, very precise. That's why we have sort of fancy words and fancy names for different things, okay? So the scientific name is a two-part name, and this is something that we can see, all right? So what you'll have is you have a genus name and a specific epithet, okay? So the genus name, such as we have these flowers here, yeah? This is flowers that are called Hibiscus clayi. Okay, Hibiscus clayi. They are a native Hawaiian flower. Okay, so their scientific name is Hibiscus clayi. It's named after Horace Clay, who used to be the botany professor here many years ago, many years ago, here at LCC. So this is Hibiscus clayi, the native red hibiscus, and you can see from here, okay, so that's a scientific name, yeah? So this here, you can see that generally the petals are kind of strap shaped. You can see the structures here too, all right? So here's a native red hibiscus known as Hibiscus clayi, okay? Now secondly, we have also a native white hibiscus. This native white hibiscus is known as Hibiscus ornatianus. Very beautiful, isn't it? And so you can see that the flowers, the petals are white, all right? Very beautiful. And another thing about the native white hibiscus, Hibiscus ornatianus, is that this species, generally, if you catch it at the right time, like in the morning, it is possibly the only hibiscus that has a smell to it. It has a very light, fragrant smell to it. You can see a little bit of a blush on this flower as well, a little bit of a pink blush on it. Anyway, so this is a native white hibiscus. So one of the things I want you to remember, since we're talking about scientific naming, is that the red native hibiscus is called Hibiscus clayi, and the white native hibiscus is known as Hibiscus ornatianus. So one of the things you'll notice is that they both have the same first name, hibiscus. Yeah, that is the genus name. The second name is called a specific epithet. So you can tell, you know, one of the ways we botanists do it is that when a taxonomist or somebody who classifies and names plants, when they name a plant, what they'll do is they'll give them, you know, if they're closely related to each other, they'll give them the same genus name. And then they'll have different specific epithets, yes, for their second name, okay? So in terms of Another example, very important plant, okay, in terms of native Hawaiian culture, very important. This plant known as taro, okay, also known as kalo, okay, very important, very nice image here. And so we have these, you can see those nice big heart-shaped leaf. Okay, so the name of this plant is Colocasia esculenta also. That is a Latin name. One of the reasons why we underline these names, or we italicize these names, or bold it, is that these names, okay, are Latin. They're either Latin or they're Latinized. And so what we'll do is we'll set it apart in a text where it's written, okay, by underlining it or italicizing it or bolding it in order to set it apart from the other words in the text. Okay, so that's kind of telling people that this is sort of like a foreign word, yeah? Because it's Latin or Latinized, that means that I guess we use Latin or Latinized names because we consider Latin a dead language. A dead language is a language that doesn't change anymore because people don't use it in ordinary conversation, yes? So here you see Colocasia esculenta. So one of the important things about using scientific nomenclature or scientific naming, yeah, is that you can tell somebody. So if you say kalo, somebody, you know, maybe in South America, they might not know that you're talking about this specific plant. But if scientists, if you're using the term Colocasia esculenta, pretty much any scientist in the world will know what particular species you're talking about. Yeah, it will be this plant here, very beautiful. You can see here the little ferns floating around in the water. And so here's some nice kalo plants growing in a lo'i kalo, or a place where people are growing plants, kalo plants. Yes. Now, another thing about angiosperms is they provide just about all the staple foods, generally all over the world, whether wherever you are, you know, in the world geographically, you know, whether in Europe, whether in Hawaii, whether in another Pacific islands, whether in Australia or any place, South America. Generally, our diet has a carbohydrate base. Okay, we need staple foods. And so one of the things that we can talk about are that generally wheat, okay, is known as the staff of light in some staff of life some places. What is a staff? That's something that helps to keep you, you know, vertical, yeah, kind of keep you on your feet. So generally for many places, they'll have wheat or rice, okay, in Asia, wheat in Europe and in the Middle East, because wheat actually first started in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, what we call the Near East nowadays, yes? So wheat, you know, bread wheat, pasta comes from wheat, all right? Rice in the Far East and in Southeast Asia, another staple. Corn in the Americas, very important. So these form the staple foods. All right. Another thing, cassava, also known as manioc, also known as tapioca. Cassava is a very important plant, okay, in Africa and in South America, and in some places in Asia as well, as a carbohydrate source. Potato, you know, which some people call Irish potato, it actually originated in the Andes, I believe. Okay. So what we call the white potato, the Irish potato, so more specifically or more truly called the Peruvian potato, was taken back by Spanish explorers back to Spain, where it fed a lot of the peasantry in Europe, and it was practically probably responsible for the big population boom that happened in Europe, you know? And the sweet potato too, very much a main staple along with kalo in Hawaii. So the two main foods in traditional Hawaiian diet is the kalo and the uala, or the sweet potato. And here's a mystery, is that generally sweet potato, people pretty much assume that sweet potato came from the Americas. Nobody knows how it got into Polynesia, even though it has served as a staple food in Hawaii. Okay, it has served as a staple food probably in Tahiti and in other Pacific islands. But generally, kalo and sweet potato, nobody knows how sweet potato got to Polynesia. So this is something that will be very exciting because people find out things all the time. And so when we find out, you know, how sweet potato got into the Pacific area, then that will be a mystery, you know, solved. All right. Now another thing is that flowers and fruits, okay, are qualities of angiosperms. All right. So the flower, okay, so the flower, if we can take a look at this model here, okay. Here we have a model of the flower, okay. if you can see it. All right. So this is a cutaway model of something that we call a complete and perfect flower. Okay. That means that it has all four floral parts. Generally, a flower is a short shoot axis. It's like a short shoot that has modified leaves. So all the parts of the flower are actually were once leaves, but they've actually become modified to have this particular shape. This is like a cutaway version, so we can see a section of it. So the outer part, okay, of the flower are these parts here. Oftentimes they're green. Okay, they can be other colors as well, but oftentimes they're green and leaf-like because it's all leaf after all. And this green part here are called the sepals. Okay, the sepals collectively, okay, kind of help to form the bud in which a flower develops, so it serves in protecting the flower. Okay, inside of the sepals, here you have oftentimes a colored part of the plant. They can be pink, like in this flower model. They can be red. They can be orange. It can be almost any color you can think of. Okay, blue, green. Okay, and generally the function of the petals is to help to attract a pollinator. Okay, a pollinator, because generally flowers need to have some kind of an agent to transfer pollen from one part of the flower to another. Okay, another part of the same flower or another flower. Inside of the petals, here you have what they call the male part of the flower. These are called the stamens. Okay, and here we have a little cutaway in this part called the anther. Here you have pollen grains developing. Okay, and this part here is called the filament. Then in the center of the flower, you have what we call the female part of the flower, and this is called the pistil. Okay, and the pistil is made up of three parts. We have here the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Okay, don't worry about this too much right now. We're going to get into this a little bit more in depth. I just want you to kind of get exposed to this a little bit, because the more time you hear something, the more times you hear something, the more likely it is you're going to remember it. So here we have a nice model of the flower with the four parts: sepals, petals, stamens, and the pistil. Okay, four main parts of a complete and perfect flower. And if we can come back to the computer here, okay, here we have another cutaway of a flower. Very, very beautiful illustration. And you can see the parts here also. So these parts here are cut away, but this is like a variation. Flowers are all variations, but they all have the same theme. Okay, here we have a sepal. Okay, and here we have petals. Okay, of this particular flower, and here you have the stamens. Okay, the stamens here. Oh, I see them right over here. All right, with the anther and the filament, and then here you have a section of the ovary with the ovules inside. Okay, so the male part of the flower is called the stamens. Female part of the flower called the pistil. The pistil has the ovary as well as other parts, and the ovary contains the ovules. Okay, thank you. All right. Very nice. Okay. Now generally too, flowering plants. Flowering plants are also known as the magnolia phyta. Okay, they're also known as the anthophyta. And the flowering plants can be divided into two types. Okay, one are called monocots and the other types are called dicots. Okay, you think, that sounds weird, you might think. Yeah, but it actually makes sense when you look at the words and you think about what it means. The cot part of the mono means one, and di means two, and the cots refers to cotyledon or seed leaf. Okay, so here we have here a monocot seedling. So here it looks sort of like a corn plant, but it is a monocot. So monocots generally have one seed leaf or one cotyledon when the seed is germinating. Now, so this is a little baby plant, a little baby monocot with one seed leaf or one cotyledon, so that is a monocot. And then here we have one that has two little seed leaves, a little plant with two little seed leaves, and this one here, two leaves, and that means dicot. So this one here, of course, developed from a seed, germinated from a seed, and the first leaves, which are called the seed leaves, are also known as a cotyledon. So we have monocots and dicots. Monocots with one cotyledon and dicots with two cotyledons. Now, in addition to flowering plants, we also have non-flowering plants. So these include plants that reproduce through spores, all right? So here we have, looks like we have mosses, okay, some lichens as well. So here we have mosses. So if we could go to the Elmo, we could take a look at this little container here, right? And so here we have these small little mosses. It's a little hard to tell that they're green, but still you can see that these plants are very small. And if you take a look at them, you see these little parts here. That is actually the part that bears the spores, okay, of the moss. All right. And so mosses and ferns bear spores. So here you have a moss plant, just like we saw, very, very small plants. They're usually smaller than 2 inches tall. These have a sporangium here. So that just means the organ that bears the spores, okay? Moss plant here with a little bit of the rest of its body here with the sporangium. And then we have ferns, okay? Ferns, at one point really dominated the earth as well. And if we go back to the Elmo, we have a little plant here that we can show, okay? Here, let's see if we can turn it a little bit to show what I want you to see. Okay, so if you look at it right over here, this is one of the qualities that we can use to determine what a fern is. You see that little thing here? This, oh, I'm sorry, I better turn it a little bit. This little thing is a developing leaf. It's called a fiddlehead. Okay, it's like a little, the end part of a violin that kind of curves like this, okay? At the tip, when you're playing a violin at the other end, okay? That's called a fiddlehead. I don't know why they call it a fiddlehead, but that is actually a part that, that is a quality of all different kinds of ferns. All ferns unfurl that way. All ferns unfurl their leaves that way in the form of a fiddlehead. Okay, so that's one way you can identify a fern, all right? Now we also have other non-flowering plants, including gymnosperms. Okay, if angiosperms means seed in a vessel or seed in a container, gymnosperms means naked seed. You can think of gyms, like gymnasium. In the old Greek days, the gymnasium was a place where these guys, these men would actually do their athletic competition, Greco-Roman wrestling and different things like that. All right. Okay, so gymnosperms mean naked seeds. That means these plants, okay, have their seeds born nakedly right on the outside. They're not enclosed within a fruit. The seeds are actually born on cones and structures such as that. So they have their seeds naked, okay, or exposed to the outside, okay? So I bet you're not going to forget about that with the gymnosperms, yeah? Okay, that's kind of like a sort of a risky sort of thing. Now the conifers, are one major group of gymnosperms. In fact, the coniferous forests that sort of cover North America, the northern part of North America and the northern part of Eurasia, that's actually, or what they call the coniferous forest. That's one of the very few terrestrial ecosystems that are not actually dominated by angiosperms, one of the very few ones that are not. So the coniferous forest, a very important source of cypresses and redwoods and all sorts of different kind of gymnosperms that we use for building materials, like fir. We go to City Mill or go to one of the other building stores and we can buy this nice wood. So you have fir, you have redwood. This is all from different kinds of conifers. Another thing too is people also use that to as fuel, to burn for fuel, and also for paper. Pulp of gymnosperms is actually one of the main sources of paper. Okay. All right, and another kind of organism. Okay, it's not actually in the same kingdom as plants, even though they are. Some of them are related. All right. Recall that we said a little earlier that algae is a plural form of the word. Alga is singular. Okay, so you can speak about different kinds of alga, the brown alga, green alga, or red alga, all right? So these organisms generally tend to live in wet environments. They can tend to live in the oceans, in the open oceans, or they can live in benthic areas, right near the coastal areas. So if you go to almost any beach in Hawaii And even if you don't have rocks on the shore that has algae clinging to it, if you actually go snorkeling or swimming around in there, if there are basalt rocks in there, generally you'll see algae attached to them, yes? Also, if you go into a freshwater stream in Hawaii that is not, totally dry, what you'll see is you'll have these green algae, sort of like hair, yeah? And so we have marine and freshwater environments where these algae live. Another thing about algae is that generally they come in unicellular forms and they come in multicellular forms. Okay, so here's a beautiful image. There are two different kinds of unicellular algae that we're going to go into a little later. One of them is called diatoms. And diatoms are very special because what they do is they have these cell walls that are made partly of silica. So when you have their cell walls, they look like cut glass or crystal. Yeah, so very, very beautiful. Okay, so some unicellular algae include the diatoms. You also have others called dinoflagellates, all right? Then we also have multicellular algae, okay? And now in these multicellular algae, which are what some people call the macroalgae because they're larger, you can see them without a microscope, all right? So these different algae are divided into three groups. We have the red algae, like this alga here is one of the red algae, I believe. It's something called Laurencia. Okay, Laurencia, one of the red algae. And so these are classified by their pigment. So red algae have phycobilins, yeah, they give them their reddish or purplish or other colors. And red algae are a source of agar, which is used in science laboratories, all right? So this red alga is also known as, I believe it's called limu lipe'epe'e, okay? So this particular alga is edible, all right? So you have the red algae, you also have other algae called brown algae that are called brown algae because they have certain pigments, xanthophylls, and other some such present in their bodies. And we also have the green algae that has chlorophylls A and B in them. Yes? So algae, are kind of important in the Hawaiian environment. In fact, in Hawaii, this is a wonderful place to study marine biology, whether you're studying the marine plants or the marine animals, all right? So generally in Hawaii too, traditionally, limu was an important part of the Hawaiian diet, very important, especially to women. And did you know in the old days, the women were the limu experts. They were the ones in Hawaii who knew all about the algae that was growing, where was the best place to collect them, how to collect them in an appropriate way so that they'll grow back and where you wouldn't devastate the environment, because in the olden days, people really respected the environment. They understood it, they lived with it, and they respected it. All right? So in the olden days, some people think that maybe the women were the limu experts because traditionally Hawaiian women had more kapu applied to their behaviors and their dietary habits and things like that. So people believe that women were the limu experts because of that. So they had to investigate different sources of food. Yeah. So limu. Remember that women, even nowadays in the sciences, a lot of the phycologists or people who study limu, they're women. Yeah. Okay, interesting, very interesting. And in Hawaii as well as in Asia, very important in terms of sources of vitamins and minerals, yeah? Because when you think about it, in seawater you have a lot of, minerals, kind of free minerals floating around. So what happens is that these algae will just absorb the minerals into themselves. Very important and very good sources of iodine and other minerals and other sorts of products like that with nutrition. Now, fungi, okay, is a word that in the singular form is fungus, like such as a fungus among us, okay? So we have singular fungus and plural fungi. Sometimes British people will call it fungi, okay? That's just a different pronunciation, but it means the same thing. These include the molds and the mildews. So nowadays we're concerned about molds, especially in some places that they call sick buildings because people get allergic reactions, yeah? So molds can be dangerous. Mildews, and these are like the what appears on your shower curtain if you don't wash it every once in a while with vinegar or something in your washing machine. So fungi, the spores are all over the place. So these, just like algae, are spore-bearing organisms. Molds and mildews, most people don't like them. Now we have other kinds of fungi called smuts and rusts. Okay, smuts and rusts are major agricultural pests. We also have yeasts and mushrooms, which are important commercially for us humans. All right, and the products that these fungi produce include edible fungi, such as In the sac fungi, you have morels and truffles, the real truffles, not talking about the chocolates, but truffles among the most important foods in the world. And also mushrooms are things that we can eat also, edible fungi. Another thing about fungi also is that antibiotics, very, very important, especially after World War II. Probably one of the reasons why we humans live so much longer now is due to the fact is that a lot of us don't die anymore of infectious diseases. And this is due in part to the fact that we use antibiotics in order to combat infections. I think in the olden days, even like in the early 1900s, only 100 years ago, a lot of people died from infections that they got. But during World War II was when they had all these different kinds of antibiotics that they were testing on, trying on the men in the field, the soldiers that went off to war, and that is actually one of the reasons why we have lower mortality in some of the European, some of the Asian countries, what they call the first world countries, like the United States, is that we live longer because most of us don't die so much of infectious diseases anymore, and this is due to antibiotics. Okay, some of which are from fungi. Okay, and then we also have beer and wine. Beer, anybody has a home brewery. So I think locally here we have a couple of places that are famous for their beers, very, delicious beers, and wine. These are alcoholic products that are made from the breakdown of cereal grains or of fruits. And what that does is that actually causes alcoholic fermentation to produce alcohol, and then we have the very nice beers that we have in some places, also very good wines, if you like wine. So this is a result of yeasts, okay? The action of yeast, and yeasts are unicellular algae. I'm sorry, not unicellular algae. They use unicellular fungi, okay? Now, cheeses and bread are another kind of product that we get from yeasts, right? So bread making, anybody who ever made bread, baked bread, generally you need to have yeast in order to do that. You have brewer's yeast when you do brewing beer, and you have baker's yeast for when you want to bake bread. And here I have a couple of nice shelf fungi to kind of look, to show you folks. Aren't they beautiful? Yeah, very nice man named Larry Abbott collected them and gave them to me, for a class some years ago. And you can see very bright colors. So they don't have pigments necessary. So these are bracket fungi, also known as shelf fungi, and they probably, are on a tree, decomposing logs in the forest. Okay, very interesting sort of what they call basidiomycetes, all right? Okay, or fungi. All right. So fungi are mostly important to us in some ways, valuable for their cheese making, for brewing and wine making. And then we also have the fact that fungi are responsible for a lot of diseases, including some diseases that are, that infect us, such as athlete's foot. Okay, athlete's foot is a fungus, a fungus among us. Okay. And then we have other kind of fungal diseases that infect plants. A lot of, did you know that a lot of fruit crops and grain crops actually go to spoilage due to the facts of rusts and smuts and molds and mildews? Another thing too is that there is a fungal disease called ergot of rye, okay? Ergots actually infect our rye plants and other grains, and if we humans intake it, if we ingest breads that are made from rye that has been infected with ergots, it can lead to hallucinations, to gangrene, and even to death. So ergotism is something that happened quite a lot, I think, in medieval Europe, where people would harvest rye because wheat tended to be reserved for the upper classes, and so people ate black bread or brown bread, darker bread, a lot of which was rye. And if they happened to mill it or to grind it, at the mill, with and make bread for the whole village, you could actually have the whole village, sort of acting psychotic, sort of losing their mind, because this ergot of rye actually has LSD in it, amazingly, lysergic acid. Scary, yeah? Okay, it doesn't happen that much anymore. Now the thing about fungi also is that the fungal body is called a hyphae. It's like filaments that kind of make their way into the soil. So if you're digging in your garden, you have all these really fine, cottony, white masses that look like this illustration here, okay? These are hyphae. And the hyphae will actually come together to form the fungal mycelium, okay, the fungal body, right? So did you know that just about the largest organism in the world is actually a fungus? Yeah, it's several miles long or several miles big. Okay? So fungi also act as parasites or sapros. Parasites mean that they feed off a living host, and saprophytes mean that they break things down. So they function majorly in our environment as decomposers. And here you can see other shelf fungi. Okay, in summary, we've covered today, okay, plants and their importance to humans. And we talked a little bit about flowering plants, also known as angiosperms. We also talked about some non-flowering plants, okay, including the mosses and the ferns and the gymnosperms. We talked a little bit about that. We talked about algae, okay, which is in a different group. They're not really plants. And we also talked about fungi as well, okay? Anyway, so that's all we have time for today. I'm glad that you stopped in to visit, and I hope that you come back, okay? So I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and we'll see you next time.